Who would be happy if their child grew up to become a janitor? A lot of times in our life, we have aspirations for our children, ambitions and hopes and dreams of what our child will become when they grow up. And we want our children to grow up to be the best that they can be and be a leader in society and to be well renowned for the work that they do and appreciated for the quality that they present. But a janitor, we almost consider to be an ignoble profession. Like, what's the value a janitor really adds? Who imagines my child is going to be a janitor someday? But really, how important is it, the career that our child picks? Right? How serious is it? What if I could guarantee you that your child will be a leader of industry? They'll be the best doctor in their field. They can be the greatest engineer to build the most amazing things in the world. They can be famous. They can be powerful. All these great attributes. I can promise that your child will have each and every single one of these. But one condition: they're not a Muslim anymore. Would you make that trade-off? Would you be okay with that? Would you accept that my child is famous, but Islam is not a part of their life anymore? When we talk about, for example, what's the most valuable attribute a child can possess, a person can possess, many times we start thinking of them in light of the fame, the power, prestige of various careers. We imagine their possession of wealth, that, okay, fine, maybe they're not the most powerful person, but as long as they're wealthy and well-to-do, we're happy, we're okay with that. But even this wealth isn't exactly as great of an asset as we would hope it is. There's a story of our Holy Prophet that's told to us by our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, where he narrates and says that when the Prophet was sitting in his mosque, a very wealthy man in very clean and nice clothes came and sat next to our Prophet. And shortly thereafter, a poor man whose clothes were a little dingy came and sat next to the wealthy man. As soon as the poor man sat next to the wealthy one took his clothes and tucked them under his side tightly and kept them away from the poor man. The Prophet saw this and he was unhappy about it, so he asked the wealthy man, he says, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" The wealthy man says, "Sure." The Prophet says, "You took your clothes and you pulled them away from this person when he sat down. Were you afraid that his poverty was going to stick to you? Is that why you did it?" The rich man said, "No, I didn't think his poverty was going to stick to me." He says, "Then did you think that your wealth was going to somehow transfer to him if he was able to touch your clothes?" The wealthy man says, "No, that wasn't going to happen either, O Prophet of God." So the Prophet asks him, "Why did you do it?" And he replies and he says, I have this associate, this companion, who advises me. And this companion of mine gives me bad advice. And the advice that he gave me was to stay away from this person. He says, "Ya Rasulullah, I want to leave this companion, so I'm going to do the opposite of what he tells me to. And I'd like to give half of my wealth to this poor man here, so that then he and I become equals, and that this companion of mine loses his power over me." Rasulullah turned to the poor man and he said, "Do you accept this offer? Will you take half of his wealth if he's giving it to you?" The poor man said, "No, I don't want it." Rasulullah says, "Why not?" The poor man replies, "Because then his companion gives him bad advice will become my companion and give me bad advice. And it's better for me not to receive his bad advice and be poor than to receive bad advice and be rich." So the value that we put into wealth and wanting our children to be wealthy isn't a bad thing, but it's not our most important priority. It's not the most valuable resource our child can have. The most valuable asset that our child can have is faith. We see the Imams explaining and saying that faith is the inheritance of the A.B.A.S, character is the inheritance of the A.B.A.S, and wealth is the inheritance of Fir'aun. That these are the attributes that we want to ensure that we pass on to our next generation. The most important of these attributes is their faith. And if our child possesses faith, then who cares what his career is? His hereafter is saved. This faith is the most important asset that we have. When a pious man comes to one of our Imams and he says, "Yabna Rasulullah, your mu'mineen, the Shia, are poor." The Imam says, "You're not poor, you're incredibly wealthy." The man says, "No, Yabna Rasulullah, we don't have much wealth." The Imam says, "No, you're very wealthy." He says, "How can you say that when I'm telling you we don't have any money?" The Imam replies and he says, "Right now, I'll give you a mountain of gold. Leave your faith. Would you do it?" The man says, "I'd never do it." The Imam says, "What if I doubled it and gave you even more? Would you leave your faith?" He says, "No." He says, then you are incredibly wealthy because your faith to you is priceless. Then you possess the most valuable of assets. Our goal when we raise our children, it's great to want them to have great careers. It's great to want them to succeed in life and become professionals and to become all these great attributes. But the most important thing you have to impress on your child is not that they have the best career, but they have faith in their life, and that faith doesn't leave them. When we look in the Holy Quran, in Surah Baqarah, verse number 132, we see Allah describing the conversation of Ibrahim. وَوَصَّى بِهَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ بَنِيهِ وَيَعْقُوبَ يَا بَنِيَّ إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَسْتَفَى لَكُمُ الدِّينَ فَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. In this verse, Allah describes the will of Ibrahim to his sons and Yaqub as well too. Allah says, and this did Ibrahim bequeath to his sons, and so did Yaqub, my children. Allah has chosen for you a faith. Therefore, do not die unless you are Muslims. This tradition is telling us of the importance of ensuring of the most important part of our will, the most important part of the remainder that we leave behind on this earth. It's not the wealth, it's not the property, it's not the titles and the statuses, but the faith and the love of Allah and Islam, and to ensure that each one of us preserves this message of Islam in our generations. There's a really interesting conversation that happens that Allah is talking about the wasiyah of Ibrahim to his sons and the wasiyah of Yaqub to his sons. And Allah is pairing them both in the same sentence. The conversation around this verse is all about the story of Nabi Ibrahim. But when it comes to the wasiyah of Ibrahim, Allah mentions it's a wasiyah of Ibrahim and of Yaqub. Now there's a variety of different explanations of why Allah chose to mention Yaqub with Ibrahim in this verse. One opinion, for example, states and says Yaqub being mentioned is because Yaqub, or Jacob, is the forefather of the religions of Judaism and Christianity, and that from them comes the continuity to Islam, and Yaqub's wasiyah was for the people of the Jewish and the Christian nations to realize the importance of submitting to the will of Allah, and that to eventually submit to the Holy Prophet. Hence, Allah mentions in the Quran that even Yaqub held the same opinion, that eventually humanity should come to Islam. But there's another opinion as well too, which says that Yaqub is the direct grandson of Ibrahim. And here Allah is describing the will of the grandfather, and then he's adding to it and saying the grandson gave the same wasiyah. That maybe this is a lesson for us. And one interpretation is that this is a lesson for us, that the most important thing that we can achieve in our generations, the most important will that we can leave in our generations, is the example of the same will that Ibrahim left, that Yaqub repeated on his grave, on his deathbed. Do not die except that you are Muslim. Allah has chosen for you a religion of submission. Ensure that this religion persists in your lineage. And for us, to make sure that our children, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren all follow the religion of Islam, is something that we shouldn't be leaving to our deathbed, but that it's a reinforcement on the moment of our deathbed to ensure that if we have lived a life of Islam, that our generations live a life of Islam and they never exit the religion of Islam. So therefore, let's look back at our question that we began our discussion with. What would you do if your son became, or your child became, a janitor? I think that the next logical question here is, okay, he became a janitor, but what about his faith? And if that faith is preserved, I'm okay with him being a janitor. But if he has no faith and he's a janitor, that's a really bad situation to be in.